866.
On May 19th, 2022, Saudi Arabia launched its fifth housing and population census. It's to be implemented by the Ministry of Health and the General Authority for Statistics. The last census was in 2010. Lucian, you may remember we did a Yella segment on this in May, and it discussed sort of a humorous and completely on-target government public service announcement. Do you recall that? That encouraged Saudi citizens to refrain from their natural instinct to invite census takers into their homes for food and refreshment.
Because they would never get the job done.
Exactly. So apparently the Saudis took that to heart and suppressed their sort of innate hospitality because the census is in. And when it was launched in May, they basically said that the findings and all the data would start to be rolled out this quarter, fourth quarter, so beginning in October. So we have the early sort of top line results from the 2022 census. And they are. Saudi Arabia's total population in 2021 was 34 million. That'd be a problem. 34,110,000. Up 16.8% from 2012's 29,195,000. So the annual growth rate has been 9.3%. Breakdown of the Saudi population between Saudis and non-Saudis is 19,363,000 Saudis, 14,747,000 non-Saudis. Age group below 15 years, 24.5% of the population. Between 15 and 64 years is 72% of the population. So again, that's the top line numbers. And we can expect more data to be announced, especially regarding housing, demographics, et cetera. But these are early returns on an important study. As mentioned, it was done. Last one was done in 2012, in 2010 actually. This one was delayed, obviously, because of the pandemic. So there you have it. Those are the latest big numbers from the Saudi 2022 census.
A very highly caffeinated census, if they were unable to resist the lure of bringing in for coffee. Really cool stuff, Richard. It does show that Saudi Arabia is growing very quickly. We did a sort of a featured article on this on our website, suscg.com this week, and had some data that was more forecasted from worldometers.com or worldometers.info, which I discovered during the pandemic is a really good tracker of COVID cases locally and globally. And they use some of the current numbers, like these numbers coming out, and then they forecast what's coming up next or what's going to be announced this year. So they said roughly 36 million by the end of this year, but we won't know because these numbers are from 2021. But either way, this is really cool. Really interesting stuff too on the population. 25% you said under 15, which is a key number. That's a lot of youth in Saudi Arabia, which has sort of been a thing for about a decade. But it kind of highlights how young Saudi Arabia's population is. It's not as young as it used to be though a few years ago. I think that it's because Saudis are having fewer kids. The nature of the family dynamic has changed a little bit. So it's a little bit more expensive now to have many children, as some Saudis do. So just really interesting stuff. Interesting stuff if you're in the B2B space, if you're in the G2G space. All this stuff is really good to know about Saudi Arabia.
And that's a good point. It'll be interesting when they come out on this, because I'll be interested to see the housing and the demographics. So, for example, all right. So birth rates might be probably declining, and why? But there'll be more nuclear families. I'm guessing, young families who aren't living with their, 2 or 3 generations in a compound. They're living on their own in an apartment or a townhouse or a single family. Because there's more of that. I'm hoping it returns a lot of interesting demographic detail like that. So that is ostensibly to come over this quarter.
Yep. Very, very cool.
I want to add too, 19 million Saudis, it's not a lot.
No,
I mean,
it's not a lot.
I think this is something that Saudi Arabia is aware of, and in terms of their planning and stuff, they're always they have to be alert to the fact. Because, so for example, if you look across the Gulf, Iran is 86 million. Look across the Red Sea, it's Egypt's 106 million. Pakistan 230 million. obviously on the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia is by far, the largest population. I think the native population in the UAE, the Emiratis, is just over 1 million. Qataris would be significantly less than that. The point being is Saudi Arabia has never thought of itself as the kind of country that could, just, in terms of population is huge. And I think they try and, manage their foreign relations and manage their security issues and that sort of thing with that in mind, remembering that there's still less than 20 million Saudis, in the country.
And more Saudis, but less than 20 million. They're obviously in the throes of Nitakat, which is ongoing and constantly changing and updating. And actually, Richard, that's been over a decade now. I think that's been
2011.
implemented 2011. So yeah, over a decade. So I mean, that's a challenge too, is sort of it's related to employment, but getting these Saudis into jobs and then getting these expats out of the country that were there to work. So it's a very fluid situation.
But just for our listeners or viewers, it's interesting, and we've talked about this, Mohammed bin Salman's vision down the road, 2030, 2040, is basically a 50-50 split. Mm-hmm. He sees 40 million by 2030. And when he talks about NEOM and the line and that sort of thing, and what he sees even further down the road is 50% Saudis, 50% expats. And which is an interesting vision, and I think it's a healthy vision. It's, if the more capable and willing people who want to come to your country, the better for the country.
Yeah, agreed. I wonder what the split is in the U.S. for citizens and immigrants and non-citizens. I mean, the U.S. is a completely different beast, obviously, but
well, it is, and we've had generations of cycles for people, immigrants to come and then become immersed in basically just, involved in the country. So we're all immigrants in essence, which I guess in the long term is going to be an interesting story for Saudi Arabia as generations unfold and decades into the future, how they deal with citizenship for a lot of these folks.
I was just about to say, yeah, what does it mean to really be Saudi? Because right now to get Saudi citizenship is not easy, whereas in the U.S., it's a little bit easier. I mean, not easy either, but if you're born here, you're automatically a U.S. citizen. In Saudi Arabia, that's not the case. So yeah, the definition of Saudi identity going forward is something that MBS is focused on, but it's just an interesting thing to think about because there's enormous pride there. I mean, especially for Saudis that are, really go back, have a strong tribe identity, etc.
It is enormous pride, and it's the pride that comes from being in an emerging country, a developing country that's not very big. And I suppose it's the pride we all felt, when there were 13 colonies. Mm-hmm. Of being an American vis-a-vis British or French, and that's, I'm sure that's not an apt analogy. I'm sure there's people who have problems with that. My point being is once again, when we look at Saudi Arabia, it's a young country, and all these things that we take for granted in terms of evolving into a nation, which is different from a country, they're either on their way to, passing through, but not yet on the other side. So as ever, Saudi Arabia is endlessly fascinating. This will be one of the things that we'll watch to see how it resolves itself.
Indeed. Do we have any timelines on the rest of the data? Because I know some of the data was released by the Ministry of Health, I think. I could have that wrong.
They took the lead on this. Yeah.
It
just said, and the May announcement said it'd start coming out and beginning in October and into the fourth quarter. So I assume we'll see more of this. This was the first we've seen of it.
Yeah, so a little bit of a trickle as they process it. It takes the census people a long time to do their work here in the U.S. So, very interesting.